He could have walked away clean. All Warren Taft had to do was submit one report, a structural assessment on the fourth-floor support columns of the Meridian Tower project, and sign his name to numbers he had not calculated and would not stand behind. He refused. 9 days later, the temporary scaffolding on the east face of that building collapsed. One man died. His name was Patrick Ossie. He was 38 years old and had 2 daughters and a son, and a wife named Cynthia, who worked the early shift at a laundromat on Fletcher Avenue. 3 weeks after the funeral, Warren walked out of Hargrove Construction with a cardboard box and a final paycheck that cleared on a Friday and was gone by Monday. That same Friday, he received a phone call he had not expected from a woman named Dolores Fitch at the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services, who said his name had appeared in Patrick Ossie's emergency contact file and who asked if he was in a position to talk. Cynthia had died of a brain aneurysm 11 months before the accident. There were no grandparents on either side who were able. A brother in Atlanta had said, over the phone, that he had 4 kids of his own and no room, and he was sorry. Warren said he would be there in half an hour. The county building on Lakeside Avenue was a low gray structure with fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency that lived just behind the eyes. Dolores Fitch was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the voice of someone who had made too many of these calls and had never once stopped caring about them. She walked Warren down a corridor and stopped at the end of it. "I want you to know what the options look like," she said. "There is a placement in Parma for the youngest. The middle girl can go to a foster family and mentor. Nadia is 12. She's old enough to understand what separation means, and she is doing her best not to let her sisters see that she is frightened." She opened the door. The 3 girls were sitting on a bench under a window with a view of the parking lot. Nadia was in the middle with her arms around her 2 younger sisters, not pulling them close, just resting there, the way a person holds something they are afraid of losing. Ossie was 7, and she had her chin tipped down against her older sister's arm. The youngest was 4 and had fallen asleep against Nadia's shoulder with her mouth slightly open. Nadia looked up when Warren came in. She did not cry. She did not look away. She said in a voice that was careful and very quiet, "My dad told me you were the only honest person at that job." Warren did not say anything for what felt like a long time. He signed the temporary guardianship papers at Dolores's desk. She told him the arrangement would be reviewed in 90 days. She told him he would need to demonstrate stable housing and consistent income. She did not say what would happen if he could not. That night, in the apartment on Dunham Road, Warren sat at the kitchen table after the 3 girls were asleep and opened his notebook to a blank page. He wrote down every name he could think of. A plumbing supply company on the east side that had once offered him a part-time inspection job he had turned down. A private contractor in Lakewood who owed him a favor. A hardware store on Lorraine that had a help wanted sign in the window he had walked past 6 weeks before without stopping. In the morning, he made oatmeal and put it in 3 bowls and 1 mug. The youngest, whose name was Bia, did not yet fully trust a spoon. Nadia reached across without being asked and helped her. 16 years later, in a conference room on the 22nd floor of a building overlooking the Cuyahoga River, a woman named Sylvie Crane was reading a due diligence file that was making her increasingly quiet. Sylvie was 39, a senior associate at Kellerman & Fitch Partners, a mid-market mergers and acquisitions firm, with offices in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and 1 satellite room in Columbus that everyone pretended was an office. She had been assigned to the Hargrove acquisition 6 weeks ago and had spent those 6 weeks doing what she was paid to do, which was find the problems before they found her client. Her client was a private equity group out of Cincinnati called Meridian Capital, which was preparing to acquire Hargrove Construction, the 3rd largest commercial construction firm in the state of Ohio, for $280 million. The sellers were a consortium of investors and the founder's grandson, a man named Clifton Hargrove III, who was 44 years old and who had, in Sylvie's professional assessment, the confidence of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. The buyers were 3 women. That was the part that had made Sylvie slow down. The acquisition vehicle was a holding company called Ona Group, incorporated in Delaware with a principal address in Chicago. The 3 principals were listed as Nadia Ossie, Chief Executive Officer, Ossie, Chief Financial Officer, and Beatrice Ossie, Director of Operations. The three women had filed their operating agreement 4 years ago. In the past 3 years, ONA Group had acquired 2 mid-size construction supply firms and a structural engineering consultancy. The financing for this deal had already been confirmed by a bank in Chicago. The offer was clean, the documentation was thorough, and attached to the final term sheet was a rider, 1 page, 3 numbered items, labeled as a non-financial condition of closing, that Sylvie had read twice and then sat down and stared at the wall for a while. She had asked Clifton Hargrove's counsel what the rider was about. They had said they didn't know. She had asked her own associate to pull the background on the 3 principals. He had come back 20 minutes later with a look that meant he had found something and wasn't sure how to present it. She pulled the background herself. All 3 women had legally changed their names at age 18, each one of them adding OC back as a surname. Their birth records listed their father as Patrick OC, Senior Structural Technician, Hargrove Construction, deceased November 14, 2008. Their guardian of record, from December 2008 through 2021, was listed on every document as Warren Taft. Current address, 4417 Dunham Road, Cleveland, Ohio. Sylvie opened a second tab and typed Warren Taft into the Ohio Department of Commerce Licensing database. 41 active inspection certifications. The most recent had been filed 3 months ago. She typed his name into the general search with the words Hargrove Construction. The 4th result was a PDF archived from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, dated December 2, 2008. The headline was, Engineer Questions Structural Sign-Off Before Fatal Tower Collapse. The article was 9 paragraphs. It did not use the word whistleblower. It referred to Warren only as a licensed structural engineer who had been employed by the firm at the time of the incident. She printed the article. She read it again. Then she called her assistant and told him to reschedule her afternoon. She drove to Dunham Road the next morning. The street was a long residential block in a neighborhood that had been through several versions of itself. The house at 4017 was a narrow 2-story with white aluminum siding and a covered porch and a yard, where someone had planted a row of tulip bulbs along the front walk that hadn't come up yet. The garage door was up. Inside, a man in a blue work shirt was running a hand level along the edge of a replacement window frame propped between 2 sawhorses. He was tall, somewhere in his mid-50s, with gray at his temples and the forearms of a man who had spent 30 years working with his hands at his eyes at the same time. He looked up when he heard her footsteps on the gravel. She gave her name. She gave the firm's name. She told him she was the counsel for the buyers in an acquisition involving Hargrove Construction, and that his name had come up in the course of her research. Warren set the level down on the sawhorse. He did not reach out to shake her hand. He said, I figured someone would come eventually. I didn't know which side they'd come from. She asked him if he knew that Patrick O'C's daughters were preparing to buy the company that had cost their father his life. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know they're doing something. Nadia doesn't tell me the details. I've never asked her to. Sylvie looked around the garage. The tools were hung on pegboards with the kind of careful arrangement that takes years to develop. A row of levels sorted by length. A torque wrench set in a case with the lid up. On the wall above the bench, taped with 2 strips of yellow painter's tape, was a blueprint. She stepped closer. It was a structural diagram of a support column system, labeled in the upper right corner, Meridian Tower Level 4 East. In the margin, in faded red ink, was a stamp, submitted for fictional review. W. Taft, not authorized for sign-off. He invited her inside for coffee. The kitchen was small and looked like it had been used by someone who took cooking seriously and had no interest in decorating. A cast-iron skillet hanging on a hook. A corkboard beside the refrigerator with takeout menus and a grocery list, and a photograph pinned in the corner. 3 young women and a man in a gray sweatshirt standing in front of a lake, squinting against the sun. He answered her questions in short sentences. He told her he had started doing independent inspections the week after he was terminated. His first job had been a cracked foundation wall, belonging to a retired postal worker 2 streets over, who had paid him partly in cash and partly in a standing offer of homemade soup whenever he needed it. He said it had been the simplest decision he had ever made to keep going. She asked whether Patrick had known, in the days before the accident, that the structure was unsound. Warren set his mug down. He said that Patrick had come to him 11 days before the collapse and told him he had flagged the column issue twice with the floor supervisor and once with the site manager and had been told to get back to his station. He said Patrick had written something down. He had wanted it on record somewhere, with someone, even if that someone was only a friend. Sylvie drove back on I-90 in silence. Somewhere past the airport she said aloud, "To nobody, whose interests am I protecting here?" She did not answer herself, but she thought about a case from 7 years ago, a demolition contractor in Akron named Raymond Chen, who had refused to falsify load-bearing assessments on a decommissioned warehouse. The company fired him. Her firm took the case on reduced contingency. They lost because the company had routed the internal documentation through a subsidiary in Nevada, and the paper trail ended in a box that had been water-damaged in a flood that was, everyone agreed, a genuine coincidence. Raymond Chen had lost his license on a separate complaint filed by the same company 18 months later. She had heard from a colleague that he was driving a delivery truck now. She had not followed up to confirm it. She drove home to her apartment in Lakewood and sat at her kitchen table for a long time without turning on any lights. The ONA Group offices in Chicago were on the 14th floor of a building in the West Loop, and when Sylvie arrived for the meeting she had requested on no notice, Nadia Osei came out to the reception area herself to let her in. Nadia was 28 years old. She was wearing a dark blazer and had the unhurried manner of someone who had spent a long time learning not to react before she was ready. She offered coffee. She did not ask why Sylvie was there. They sat across from each other at a conference table with nothing on it but 2 mugs, and the rider, which Sylvie had printed out and placed in the center of the table. "I need to understand what this is," Sylvie said. Nadia looked at it without picking it up. The rider read, in 3 numbered items. 1. Hargrove Construction shall issue a public statement to be submitted as a press release to the Associated Press, formally restoring the professional record of any employees improperly terminated within the preceding 20 years. 2. The name Warren Taft shall be specifically named in that statement, with language acknowledging that his refusal to authorize the Level 4 East structural assessment on the Meridian Tower project was consistent with his professional and ethical obligations, and that his termination was retaliatory and without legitimate cause. 3. A written letter of apology, signed by Clifton Hargrove III personally, shall be delivered to Warren Taft at his home address within 10 days of close. No financial settlement is requested. No financial settlement will be accepted. Sylvie read the last line again. Nadia said, "He doesn't know what we're doing. He doesn't know this deal exists. My sisters and I decided 3 years ago that we would not tell him until it was finished. He spent 16 years making sure we had a life. He has never once asked us to do anything about what happened to our father. Not once. So we decided we would do it without him having to ask." Sylvie sat with that. She was at this moment the contracted counsel for Meridian Capital, which was the buyer, and whose interest was in closing the deal. The rider was a condition of the sellers, meaning it had to be accepted by Hargrove's side. Her job was to get the deal closed. The rider was not her problem, except that she had spent the last week pulling records, and she had found something she had not been looking for. And now it sat in her briefcase in a manila envelope, and she had not yet decided what to do with it. She rode the elevator down alone. She had gone looking for a complaint filed against Warren Taft, something that would explain his departure from Hargrove in cleaner terms. Instead, she had found a set of internal communications that had been produced in a peripheral civil suit in 2011 and never fully examined. The communications were between Clifton Hargrove II, the current owner's grandfather, who had run the company at the time, and the company's insurance carrier. They were dated 3 days after the collapse. The subject line of the first email was, "Taft situation." The email said, in full, "Taft is gone. OSHA report will show operator error. Make sure our exposure is clean." The OSHA final report on the Meridian Tower incident had been issued in February 2009. It had concluded that the collapse was the result of improper rigging technique on the part of the deceased. Patrick Osei had been officially assigned full responsibility for his own death. Sylvie had printed the email. She had put it in the envelope. When she had driven to Chicago, she was standing now in the lobby of the ONA Group building looking at the revolving door. She thought about Raymond Chen. She went back up. Nadia did not look surprised when Sylvie came back into the conference room. She waved off her assistant and closed the door herself. Sylvie put the envelope on the table. She said, "I am not sure this changes the deal, but you should have it." Nadia opened the envelope. She read both pages. Then she folded them carefully and set them down in front of her and looked out the window at the gray Chicago skyline for a while. "My father was not careless," she said. Not to Sylvie, not to anyone in particular, just to say it, in a room where someone else could hear it. Sylvie said, "No, he wasn't." The closing meeting was held 3 weeks later in a conference room in downtown Cleveland. Clifton Hargrove III arrived with 4 attorneys. He was wearing a very good suit and the expression of a man who was selling something he had been meaning to get rid of. The ONA Group principals came in at 9 o'clock. Nadia took the head of the table. Osi sat to her right with a leather portfolio. Bia, who was 20, set up a laptop at the corner of the table and did the introductions, unhurried. Clifton's lead attorney moved through the standard items. Then Nadia tabled the writer. Clifton read it. He put it down. He said, with the patience of a man who has never had to be patient, "This is not a legal document. This is a personal grievance. We are not in the business of issuing apologies to former employees." Nadia said, "Then we are not in the business of closing today." Clifton looked at his attorneys. His attorneys looked at each other. The lead one leaned in and said something quietly. Sylvie stood up. She told the room, in measured sentences, that she had discovered in the course of her due diligence a set of internal communications between the former CEO and the company's insurance carrier that had direct bearing on the original OSHA determination in the Meridian Tower collapse. She said that she had provided these communications to ONA Group as required by her professional obligation to disclose material information affecting the transaction. She said that the communications appeared to indicate coordination between the company and its insurer to predetermine the official finding of operator error prior to the close of the OSHA investigation. The room was quiet for a moment. One of Clifton's attorneys, the youngest one, who had not spoken yet, picked up his copy of the term sheet and turned it over. He read something on the back. He turned it face down again. Clifton said to his lead counsel, "This is a stunt." The lead counsel did not answer him. The independent deal administrator, a man named Hartwell Briggs who had been brought in from a firm in Columbus to oversee the closing, set his pen down on the table and said, "Cliff, I think we should take a short recess." They did not come back from the recess for 40 minutes. When they did, Clifton Hargrove III sat down and did not look at any of the 3 sisters. His lead attorney placed a revised counter-signature page on the table. All 3 items in the rider had been accepted without modification. Clifton did not say anything. He signed. Nadia signed. Osi and Bia co-signed as witnesses. Bia had been quiet through the entire meeting. When the pages had been collected and the administrator had confirmed execution, she stood up, walked around the end of the table and placed something in front of Clifton. It was a photograph, small and printed on regular paper. A man in a hard hat and a safety vest, standing beside a poured foundation in bright afternoon sun. He was laughing at something off camera. His hand was raised, mid-gesture. Clifton looked at it. B said nothing. She looked at him for 2 seconds, and then she walked back around the table and sat down. Clifton picked the photograph up. He held it for a moment. Then he set it back down, face up, on the table, and he gathered his things and he left the room without speaking again. The story ran in the Plain Dealer on a Wednesday morning. The headline was, "Patrick Osi's daughter's complete acquisition of construction firm linked to father's 2008. Death. Documents reveal insurance coordination in OSHA outcome." By noon it had been picked up by the AP. By evening it was on 3 national news websites and had been shared several thousand times by people who had nothing to do with Cleveland and no connection to any of the names in the article, except that they recognized the shape of the story from somewhere in their own lives. The article named Warren Taft in the 4th paragraph. It described his refusal to authorize the structural assessment. It described his termination. It noted that he had operated as an independent inspector in the Cleveland area for the past 16 years and had never filed a lawsuit. In Lakewood, a retired contractor named Don Metzger read the article on his phone at a diner counter, folded a $10 bill into the edge of the paper, and left it on the seat without explaining why. In a suburb of Columbus, a woman who had worked the administrative desk at Hargrove Construction in 2009 sent a long email to the Plain Dealer's tip line. She had been waiting, she wrote, to say something to someone for a very long time. Warren did not know any of this when he woke up Wednesday morning. He had a water heater to look at on Granger Avenue and a cracked lintel on a house in Old Brooklyn, and the day was scheduled the way his days usually were, which was carefully and without room for the unexpected. He found out when his phone rang at 8:15. It was Dolores Fitch. She had retired 2 years ago. She said, "I saw the paper." She said, "I always knew those girls were going to do something." He sat down on the porch steps. By midday there were 2 casseroles on his porch, one from a neighbor 2 doors down whose fence he had repaired 4 years ago at no charge, and one from someone he did not recognize whose card said only, "Thank you for doing the right thing back then." A retired ironworker named Gerald Stopes left a bottle of scotch at the base of the steps with a note that read, in block letters, "I worked that site. I am sorry I didn't say it sooner." He was in the garage that afternoon when Sylvie's car came up the block. She parked at the curb and walked up the driveway, in a gray coat and flat shoes, carrying 2 cups from the coffee shop on Detroit Avenue. He had seen the cups from the shop before. Nadia brought them sometimes on Sunday mornings when she drove in from Chicago. He wiped his hands on a shop rag. She handed him one of the cups. She pulled an envelope from under her arm. Inside was a single letter on ONA Group letterhead, signed by Nadia as chief executive. The transaction had closed. The public statement had gone live on the Hargrove corporate website that morning. The letter of apology from Clifton Hargrove III was forthcoming, by certified mail, within 10 days. His name had been included in the second paragraph of the public statement, which read in full, "Warren Taft, a licensed structural engineer employed at Hargrove Construction from 2003 to 2008, refused on professional and ethical grounds to authorize a structural assessment he believed to be unsound. He was terminated as a direct result of that refusal. His assessment was correct. That refusal saved lives, and this company's prior leadership penalized him for it. That record is now corrected." He read it twice. He folded the letter into thirds and tucked it into the breast pocket of his work shirt. He looked at her. "Do you want to sit a minute?" he said. She said yes. They took the porch chairs. The light was coming in low and sideways through the maple trees, the way afternoon light does in Cleveland in early April when the leaves aren't out yet, and the sky is just barely starting to believe in itself again. Neither of them said much. The coffee was good. From inside the house, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He didn't move to get it. "They'll call again," he said. "I know," she said. 3 weeks after the close, Nadia called him on a Sunday morning the way she always did, the 3-way FaceTime with her sisters that had been a standing arrangement for years. Osei was in Pittsburgh for a project, standing in a hotel room with a coffee in her hand and the curtains still closed. Bia was in Columbus and had clearly just woken up and was not apologizing for it. Nadia was in the back of a car in downtown Chicago, watching the lake through the window. Warren sat at the kitchen table and watched the 3 of them talk. He asked Osei whether she had eaten. He asked Bia how the Columbus project was going. He asked Nadia if the office lease situation had been sorted. These were the same questions he had been asking, in some version or another, for 16 years, and none of them had ever told him to stop. When the call ended, he set the phone face down on the table and sat there for a while in the quiet. Sylvie had left a card on the kitchen counter the afternoon she had come with the letter. It had her cell number on it and, below her name in handwriting that was smaller than he expected, a single line, "If you ever want that coffee from the shop instead of from your garage, call me." He picked the card up. He read it once. He put it next to the grocery list on the corkboard. He went out to the garage and finished the window frame. The level told him it was true. He drove the final brad nails and ran his thumb along the joint, and then stood back and looked at it for a moment the way he always did, not admiring it, just checking. The street outside was quiet. Somewhere down the block a kid was bouncing a basketball in a driveway, steady and unhurried. Across the way a man was raking the last of the winter debris from his lawn. He raised a hand when he saw Warren. Warren raised his back. He went inside. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he took the card off the corkboard. He held it in both hands, the way you hold something small that you have decided not to put back down.